do something else.
Okay.
Let's start.
BIA?
Yeah.
Okay. What about the question of the similarity between the original license and the last one?
In the original license process, there was a group of tribal members that were supporting giving the license to Rocky Mountain Power Company, and that were lending their support to Frank Kerr. Some of the elders talk about a powwow that was held where Montana Power Company sponsored the powwow and gave everybody money at the powwow if they were to sign a petition stating that they supported the licensing to Rocky Mountain Power Company. That I see that as being similar to what happened in this process, in that some people were supporting a buyout, a payment to forgo the license or to forgo the fight for it. So you have the membership divided in the 1930s and then divided again in the 80s. In the 1930s, some of the membership questioned the council's authority to enter into an agreement with Rocky Mountain Power, or they even questioned whether or not the council that was established at that time was legitimate and could obligate tribal property or get involved in a process that would obligate property. And you had the same issues being raised in this process, that people were questioning the council's ability and authority to do that, and whether or not they were the appropriate group. So the historical aspects of the original process are just really intriguing to me in comparison to what we went through in the 80s, because they were just real similar. At one point in the 1930s, there was where Rocky Mountain Power was going out to the dam site and doing core drillings. A group of tribal members went out there on horseback with rifles and chased them off of the site and sat watch or guard over the site. To me, that is kind of similar to the vigil in that people were there kind of guarding the site. That was an expression of intent in wanting to control it or keep MPC off of it. So I just see a lot of similarities. Some of the Indian families, tribal member families that were involved in the process in the 30s, their ancestors were again involved in the process in the 80s. So it was kind of like a repeat of history. Mm-hmm.
Say it again, their descendants.
Their descendants, their ancestors. Yeah. Their descendants were involved, yeah, sorry. You're going to throw that one out.
Say that one again at one point.
The whole thing?
Just that last point about...
that it's real interesting to me because some of the people who were involved in the process in the 1930s, their descendants were now involved in the process in the 1980s. Cavil Dupuy was very active in the process in the 30s, and a lot of his descendants were involved in the process in the 80s, myself being one, but numerous people.
Take two went really good.
No, I'm sorry. Okay.
What about now the question about the BIA?
Well, the Bureau, I think that they were, it's like they came in 10 years too slow. They just didn't react. They didn't, to me, provide the support that they should have provided the tribe in pursuing the license or even an adjustment of the annual rental rate. They supplied one expert witness, but had the Bureau of Indian Affairs made the commitment early on in the process to purchase power from Kerr to supply the reservation, that might have changed things had that happened earlier than it did, or had they provided some sort of assistance as far as marketing, or if they had lent assistance in at least explaining to FERC the implications and the consequences, or making an effort to say what was at stake here. But I don't think they provided enough assistance. They're supposed to be our trustee or our guardian, and here was our greatest asset being challenged, and they just didn't play the sort of role that they should have.
And did that also parallel the BIA's behavior with the original license?
Oh, certainly. In the original licensing process, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was really selfish. They had ulterior motives. The Bureau had authorized this irrigation project on the Flathead Indian Reservation, and it was originally designed to serve Indian lands, but the reservation had been opened. There was now non-Indian ownership in the reservation. The project primarily benefited non-Indians who had purchased allotments. In the original design of the irrigation project, the people who were to benefit were to pay for the debt of construction. And in 1926, 1928, here was the Bureau of Indian Affairs with an irrigation project that was not yet complete. There was a $5 million debt on the construction at that time, and the Interior Committee was questioning whether or not they wanted to put any more money into it. So Lewis Crampton was in charge of the Interior Committee, Interior Appropriations. So he came out to the reservation, and all of the communities organized and had these little picnics and gave him this big tour and advocated the completion of the project. And so he made the commitment when he left that no money would be written off, that the project would be completed, and that he would find a way to fund it. Well, the funding of the completion and the payment of the debt was Kerr Dam, was the power that was available at that site. At one point, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was going to construct a power plant whose capacity was the size of the low-cost block of power that MPC currently sells to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Well, instead, MPC or Rocky Mountain Power came in and said, well, we'll build this bigger plant, and we will give you a low-cost block of power. You can retail the power on the reservation, and you can make a profit. And with the profit, you can pay back the federal government the $5 million debt. Well, nobody adequately addressed, nobody meaning the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the congressional officials or the general public, adequately addressed that was a tribal resource, that was tribal property. Those were waters that were reserved for the benefit of the tribe in the beginning of the reservation. So the Bureau simply overlooked that. They pursued the license to Rocky Mountain Power. They advocated it. They ignored the tribes. It was a shameful process. The original license probably should have never happened. It brought the tribe a certain amount of money in the interim while Montana Power controlled it, but the original process was just bad.
So in many ways, the dam's construction at that time arose from a series of progressive assaults upon the sovereignty of the tribes.
It's just like, thinking about what happened, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the reservation. First the reservation was created, then the Bureau of Indian Affairs came in and did an irrigation feasibility survey, which determined, and that was in 1907, that irrigation system was feasible. It was supposed to serve Indian lands. The system was authorized. Between the date of authorization and during the construction, the reservation was open to non-Indian settlement. In the early days, the majority of the materials purchased to build FIP irrigation ditches were purchased at Missoula Mercantile and at Beckwith Mercantile. Joe Dixon, who helped produce the legislation that opened the reservation, had an interest in the Missoula Mercantile. It was just like a comedy of errors. Beckwith Mercantile, where a lot of the materials were purchased, they ended up acquiring a lot of the allotments that were lost for an $80 debt owing Flathead Irrigation. You know, numerous tribal members lost their allotments for irrigation bills and debts prior to the time when power revenues were used to bail those bad debts out. You know, it was just the worst thing that could have happened to the tribe here. And it continues to happen today. You know, in that but now it's set up by legislation. The 1948 Act authorizes the Power Division of Mission Valley Power to continue to pay on the debt of construction for the Irrigation Division. Certain people who have benefited by the system continue to not be responsible for bad debts when tribal members in the early years of the reservation were responsible for their debts and did lose their allotments.
Where to go with that?
I got off track.
No, it's all great. It's all exactly what I was hoping you'd talk about. Is there anything you want to talk about the actual construction of the dam? I don't know if any of that is something.
Not really, you know. I'm sure somebody's touched on that a number of tribal members were killed in the construction, but that isn't something that...
Okay. Well, there is that question about the money.
Okay.
How you would like to see it used in the future.
Right now, there is a plan that specifies every year that the tribe gets the Montana Power Company payment, there's a plan that specifies where the money goes. A certain amount is set up for per capita, some goes into an educational fund, some goes back to a fund to purchase the dam at the time of takeover, conveyance fund. The conveyance fund, we as a tribe need to make sure that we put that money aside every year so that at time of takeover we do have enough money to purchase the dam. I think that the payment into the Kerr Educational Fund is a good thing. The fund is set up so that after so many years you access the interest to the money, but you don't access the principal, and you provide that to the membership for scholarships. A certain amount of that money should be earmarked to encourage tribal members to go into the fields that are necessary at the time of takeover, be it electrical engineering, power distribution, this, or marketing, or whatever. I personally don't necessarily support the amount of money that goes into per capitas. And a lot of people would instantly say that's because you have a husband, that's because you're both working, that's because you have a nice paying job, and you don't need it as much as somebody else that doesn't. I would like to see us evaluate a system where those people who don't have a job, don't work, are disabled or on fixed incomes, where they would get something, you know, but I don't think that everybody necessarily needs that. In the future, if federal funds continue to dwindle, and if the government still wants to provide the variety of services that it provides today, be it education, elderly feeding programs, housing programs, emergency assistance, burial assistance, employment, management of resources, we're not going to be able to afford to put 6-point-some million into per capitas. We need to start preparing or educating the membership for the day when that won't be there. Maybe in the future when we take over the dam and we sell the power and hopefully we make a large profit, we'll be able to afford just per capitas or dividend payments. But I don't know if that's realistic. You know, I think that the money in the future should stay as much as possible within the reservation. I think we should continue to provide the variety of services that we do today. But also, being realistic, I know that the tribe's going to have to set priorities in the future. We can't be all to everybody. You know, there's going to have to be a process where you decide what's most important and then you fund those programs or those elements. But most of all, I would just hope that the money in the future stay within the reservation boundaries and stay with the membership in the form of possibly services and scholarships, not necessarily in the form of per capitas. I would rather we provide more jobs than provide a per capita.
What about the cultural direction that this money will be used in?
The tribes currently, we, out of tribal dollars, fund 2 cultural programs, one for the Salish and one for the Kootenai. And they're both funded at a generous, what I consider to be a generous level. You know, there's over $300,000 that goes into culture. I would like to see us provide more of a means of putting the culture out to the general public. I would like to see us make an effort to make the reservation community more aware and more sensitive to our culture. I would like us to support some sort of endeavor that gets into the school systems aggressively, where culture is seen as a positive thing, where the diversity is respected and appreciated. If we could find some way to fund what we do today, but also encourage and fund that sort of an effort, I, as a member, would see that as a valuable thing. That's probably not what you wanted.
No, I had nothing in mind.
Yeah, but I mean, you know.
It was a very good answer, I thought. One last question before we run completely out of time.
Okay.
What would you like to see here in 100 years?
I'd like to see the reservation here in 100 years. I hope we'll be here, and I hope we'll be as strong as we are today or stronger. And I would like to see more of a understanding and support from the non-Indian community here. In my way of thinking, my opinion, the tribes are very good for this area. We bring lots of federal dollars into the area that wouldn't be here if this were not a reservation. There's environmental benefits for a reservation to be here. We can control certain elements that the general public wouldn't have control over. You know, it can be a very positive thing, and I think it is a positive thing. I would like to see the small minority of ACE supporters be gone. You know, we don't need that sort of turmoil. You know, we need more unity, and the non-Indian public needs to come to terms with the fact that this is a reservation. We're not going anywhere. Let's make it productive.
Okay, thanks. You're free.
Thank you. Well, will you use it?
Any jokes you want to make?
Will you use any of it?